The city lights of Neotech Metropolis always sparkled like a million broken promises against the inky black sky. And at the heart of it all stood the monolithic glass tower of Technova Solutions. Once it was a beacon, a titan of innovation whose name echoed in every tech journal and on every investor's lips. Their groundbreaking software had revolutionized industries. Their patents were legendary, and their offices hummed with the vibrant energy of 1,000 brilliant minds. This wasn't just a company, it was an empire, but like a magnificent tree. Mighty on the outside, Technova Solutions had begun to rot from within. It wasn't the market shifting or a revolutionary competitor that brought it to its knees. No, the culprit was far more insidious, a leadership bloated by ego, crippled by mismanagement, and utterly blind to the very human foundation it stood upon. Decisions were made in boardrooms far removed from reality, driven by quarterly profits and personal bonuses, while the real genius and dedication of its employees withered in the shadows. The once bright beacon was now a flickering light poised to plunge into darkness. It was into this swirling vortex of decline that Athena Vance stepped. Now Athena wasn't your typical corporate raider. She wasn't born into wealth, nor did she inherit a business empire. Her story began in the dusty backroads of rural Georgia, where she learned the value of $1, the weight of hard work, and the sting of being judged before she even spoke. She'd built her first tech company from the ground up in a cramped garage, fueled by nothing but sheer grit, and an unshakable belief in herself despite constant whispers of, "She's too young. She's a woman. She doesn't fit the mold." She'd tasted success, knew its intoxicating pull, but also understood its fragile nature. And when Technova Solutions, a company she'd once admired from afar, came up for acquisition, its stock plummeting, its reputation in tatters, Athena saw not just a failing enterprise, but a distorted reflection of what could happen when an organization lost its soul. Quietly, meticulously through a labyrinthine network of shell corporations and blind trusts, Athena Vance, the self-made tech mogul, acquired Technova Solutions. No fanfare, no press releases. Just a strategic, almost surgical strike. But acquiring it was only the first step. To truly heal the patient, she needed to diagnose the disease. Her experience had taught her that official reports were often sanitized numbers manipulated, and the truth buried under layers of corporate speak. The real problems, the deep-seated issues, existed where the suits never looked, where the power players never ventured. So Athena made a decision that would shock anyone in her position. A decision that only someone with her unique past, someone who knew what it felt like to be invisible, could ever conceive. She decided to go undercover. Not as a consultant, not as a new mid-level manager, but as a janitor. The shift was jarring. One day commanding a multi-million-dollar empire from a corner office, the next pulling on a worn uniform, pushing a bucket and mop across cold, polished floors. The physical toll was immediate. Her muscles ached in ways she hadn't felt in years. But it was the psychological shift that was truly profound. Suddenly, she was a non-entity, a phantom. People walked past her through her as if she were made of air. The very act of putting on that uniform was a cloak of invisibility. It was a bizarre, almost surreal experience to be in the same room with executives who gossiped about the company's impending doom, oblivious that the woman wiping down their conference table held their very livelihoods in her hands. And in that invisibility, the ugly truths began to surface. The whispers were louder now, unfiltered by the polite decorum of a formal meeting. "Honestly, I don't know why we still have so many cleaning staff," she heard a young intern, Tim, muse to a colleague barely bothering to lower his voice. "Doesn't even speak English, I bet," came the casual, dismissive retort from a senior manager glancing pointedly at Athena as she methodically scrubbed a stain. These weren't isolated incidents. It was a constant barrage of microaggressions, a steady drip of disdain. She saw how employees would leave their trash on the floor rather than walking to the bin expecting her to clean up their messes. She witnessed the dismissive nods, the averted gazes, the outright scorn in their eyes. It was a stark, brutal revelation. The disregard for their lowest-paid workers was not an anomaly. It was the very air they breathed. It was clear as day the company wasn't just struggling financially. It was rotting morally, and that moral decay was going to cost them everything. And the worst was yet to come. The air in the executive boardroom of Technova Solutions wasn't just thick with tension. It was heavy with a toxic brew of arrogance and apathy. As Athena, cloaked in her janitor's uniform, moved with practiced quietness, dusting a shelf near the mahogany table, the casual cruelty of the discussions unfolding before her was breathtaking. This wasn't just a cost-cutting measure. It was a human culling. "We need to trim the fat gentleman," declared Victor Thorne, the head of operations, his voice dripping with condescension. He was a man who measured success in spreadsheets and saw people as line items. "Frankly, we could easily shed 20% of the lower-level staff. Get rid of the dead weight. Keep the board happy." He gestured vaguely, as if the very presence of cleaners, cafeteria workers, or support staff was an inconvenience. Athena's heart tightened. She'd seen this trimming the fat play out too many times before in other companies, always hitting the most vulnerable hardest, always leaving a gaping wound in the company's soul. It was a vicious cycle that bled morale and depleted the workforce, yet here they were advocating it with chilling nonchalance. Her internal resolve solidified. This wasn't just about financial recovery. It was about a complete cultural overhaul. Beyond the formal meetings, the microaggressions festered like untreated wounds. In the break room, a young marketing executive, oblivious to Athena's presence as she refilled the paper towel dispenser, laughed loudly. "Can you imagine wanting to be a janitor? What kind of career aspirations is that?" The casual contempt was a punch to the gut, not just for Athena, but for every hard-working individual who poured their sweat and dedication into jobs these executives deemed unnecessary. Athena's hands tightened around her mug, her knuckles turning white. She remembered countless times in her own journey when similar comments veiled insults about her background or her ambition had been hurled her way. Each sting had fueled her, solidified her determination. She had learned the art of patience long ago, understanding that sometimes the greatest strength lies in quiet endurance. And then there was Jonathan Reed, the nominal CEO, a man who, though seemingly less overtly cruel than Thorne, was equally culpable through his inaction. He embodied the silent complicity that allowed the toxicity to flourish. He would nod along with Thorne's proposals, his eyes glazed over, seemingly more concerned with his next golf game than the lives hanging in the balance. One afternoon, Reed, lost in thought after a particularly bleak financial report, called out to Athena without even looking up from his phone. "Hey, you empty! This, will you? This trash is overflowing." He shoved a half-empty bin towards her with his foot, dismissing her with a flick of his wrist. Athena's face remained a blank slate, her movements methodical as she picked up the bin. But inside, a quiet fury simmered. It wasn't about the trash. It was about the utter dismissal of her humanity. It was about being seen as a tool, not a person. She emptied the bin, her hands steady, her expression unreadable. But as she cleaned, Athena's mind raced, connecting the dots. The rot wasn't just poor management or a lack of innovation. It was a deeply embedded culture of elitism, a contempt for anyone not sitting at the top. They saw their employees, the very people who kept the lights on the gears, turning as disposable. This was their fundamental flaw, their greatest blind spot. They were so busy looking down on everyone else that they failed to see the ground beneath their feet crumbling. And they certainly didn't see the woman in the faded uniform, calmly observing, meticulously gathering every piece of evidence, every casual insult, every cold decision. They never imagined that the most powerful person in the room was the one they considered utterly invisible. Little did they know the quiet calm before them was not acceptance, but the gathering of a storm. And that storm was about to break. As the weeks bled into each other, the vibrant hum that once characterized Technova Solutions was replaced by a low, anxious buzz. Rumors of impending layoffs circulated like a virus, infecting every department, every floor. A palpable sense of impending doom settled over the building, chilling the air even on the warmest days. For Athena, moving through the hushed corridors, the weight of her mission pressed heavier than ever. She had witnessed enough, absorbed enough. She had seen the casual cruelty, the dismissive attitudes, the strategic ignorance. The detailed notes she kept in a small waterproof notebook hidden deep in her cleaning cart now formed a damning indictment of the company's leadership. Athena had learned the art of patience long ago, cultivating it not as a passive trait, but as an active weapon. Her movements were methodical, slow, deliberate, the very antithesis of the frantic energy that now gripped the executives. But beneath that calm exterior, her mind was a whirlwind, connecting every piece of data, every overheard whisper, every dismissive glance. She often found herself lingering near the CEO's office door, her gaze drifting to the polished brass plate that for now still bore Jonathan Reed's name. Soon, it would be hers. This simple, almost mundane act of cleaning, of being a phantom presence, had granted her access to the raw, unfiltered truth. She now knew the exact contours of the rot, the extent of the damage. And she knew with an unshakable certainty that the time for quiet observation was coming to an end. The stage was set. The final board meeting that Tuesday afternoon was shrouded in an atmosphere of desperate tension. The executives huddled nervously before it began, their voices low, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and self-preservation. Victor Thorne, ever the arrogant peacock, still attempted to project an air of confident control, his voice booming about trimming the fat and making tough but necessary decisions. Yet even he couldn't entirely mask the tremor in his hands as he adjusted his tie. It was truly astonishing, almost comical, how utterly blind they were. Here they were discussing sweeping layoffs, outlining the dismantling of entire departments, including the very janitorial staff they deemed superfluous, while Athena herself, the silent architect of their impending downfall, meticulously wiped down the conference table just feet away. Their arrogance was so profound, their detachment so complete, that they couldn't even see the implications of their own words, let alone the true power in the room. Jonathan Reed, the CEO, finally arrived, his face grim. He wasted no time cutting straight to the grim prognosis. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice hoarse, "without deep immediate layoffs, we're looking at total collapse within the next fiscal quarter." The words hung heavy in the air. As the discussion spiraled, it became clear that their solutions were nothing more than a desperate scramble, slashing jobs, closing departments, reducing benefits. Anything to appease the faceless board, to cling to their own crumbling positions. Not once did they mention innovation. Not once did they speak of investment in people or fostering growth. It was a tunnel-visioned approach, a death spiral disguised as strategic planning. This, Athena knew, was their fundamental flaw, the very root of their decay. As Reed concluded, a chilling agreement rippled through the room. They had decided. The cuts would be deep. The janitorial staff, among others, would be eliminated entirely. Athena, who had just finished wiping down Reed's chair, felt a surge of cold resolve. This was it. She could wait no longer. The company would be destroyed if she allowed them to continue. Her decision wasn't based on simple emotion. It was a calculated necessity, a convergence of justice and strategic imperative. With a quiet, almost imperceptible movement, she set her mop and bucket aside, their clatter-free descent, a metaphor for the silent shift in power that was about to occur. She smoothed her worn uniform, took a slow, deep breath, and walked towards the head of the long, polished mahogany table, her footsteps barely audible on the plush carpet. Jonathan Reed was mid-sentence outlining the next steps of their plan when Athena reached him. A simple, firm tap on his shoulder. "Excuse me," she said, her voice steady, clear, and utterly devoid of the deference they expected. Reed turned, his eyes narrowing in confusion, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "What are you doing? This is a private meeting. You have no business here." It was Victor Thorne who barked the question, his voice a condescending sneer. Little did he know he was speaking to the person who owned every square inch of the room, every company asset, and every single one of their jobs. The quiet calm was over. The storm was about to unleash its full, unforgiving fury. A chilling silence fell over the boardroom, a sudden, almost unnatural quiet. Jonathan Reed, the CEO, stared at Athena, his brow furrowed in annoyance. Victor Thorne, his face contorted in a sneer, scoffed, "What in God's name are you doing? This is a private executive meeting. You have no business interrupting this. Get back to work." His words were laced with the same casual contempt Athena had endured for weeks. It was the absolute last time he would speak to her that way. Athena simply met Thorne's furious gaze with an unwavering, almost icy calm. She didn't raise her voice, didn't react to his outrage. Instead, with a slow, deliberate motion that somehow amplified the tension in the room, she reached into the deep pocket of her worn janitor's uniform. Her hand emerged, holding not a cleaning rag, but a crisp, legal-sized envelope. It was a stark contrast, the unassuming envelope, the faded uniform, and the immense, unimaginable power it contained. She walked directly to Jonathan Reed, who sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of bewildered irritation. Without a word, she placed the envelope precisely in front of him. Reed, still flustered, picked it up, his eyes scanning the official-looking documents within. As his gaze moved from the letterhead to the signatures, the color drained from his face. His jaw went slack. The confident CEO a moment ago, so assured in his authority, now looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. This can't be right," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper, eyes wide with a dawning horror. Athena's voice, though still calm now, carried an undeniable weight, a resonance that commanded attention. "Oh, it's very right, Mr. Reed," she stated each word a hammer blow. "I am Athena Vance, and I've owned this company for weeks now. I've been watching, listening, and learning everything about how it's been run. And I've heard enough to know that the decisions you're making, the values you've upheld, will not only destroy this company, but dismantle the lives of every single employee who actually keeps it running." The boardroom erupted. A cacophony of confused murmurs, shocked gasps, and furious exclamations filled the air. But it was Victor Thorne's voice that cut through the noise, thick with indignant rage. "You can't be serious! This is some kind of sick joke!" "You're just a janitor, a cleaning lady. You can't possibly own this company." He lunged halfway across the table, his face scarlet, unable to comprehend the shattering of his reality. Athena turned to him, her gaze now truly cold, an unyielding steel that cut through his bluster. "I'm not just anything, Mr. Thorne," she corrected him, her voice resonating with a quiet power that seemed to vibrate through the very walls. "I am Athena Vance, the majority shareholder. And that means I'm the woman who now controls your job, your salary, and the future of this company you've so carelessly mismanaged." The words hung in the air, a profound silence, following as they truly sank in. The other executives, who had been muttering and fidgeting, froze their faces, now mirroring Reed's initial shock. They watched terrified as the weight of her words settled heavily upon Thorne. He sputtered his defiance, crumbling into pathetic protests. "You?" Athena continued, her voice clear and precise. "Who dismiss people as dead weight and deem them unnecessary. Who embody the very arrogance that nearly drove this company into the ground. You are everything I refuse to allow here any longer." Her eyes held his unforgiving. "Mr. Thorne, consider this your last day at Technova Solutions. You're fired." The simple command hung in the air, followed by a collective intake of breath from the other executives. Thorne's face went from crimson to ashen. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Almost on cue, two security guards who had been discreetly waiting outside entered the room. They looked directly at Thorne, who despite his bluster was now a portrait of utter defeat. No one in the room, not a single one of his esteemed colleagues, uttered a word in his defense. His arrogance had earned him no allies. As Thorne was escorted out, the silence that fell was thick with fear and a dawning realization. The power dynamics had shifted irrevocably in a single breathtaking moment. Athena, still clad in her uniform, turned to the remaining executives, her gaze sweeping over each of their terrified faces. "This company," she declared, her voice regaining its steady resolve, "has been rotting from the inside. But that ends today." She walked to the head of the table, pulling out the chair Jonathan Reed had just vacated. "My vision for Technova Solutions is not about layoffs and budget cuts to satisfy a disconnected board. It's about building a company that truly values its people, invests in innovation, and fosters a culture of respect, growth, and long-term sustainability." Her words were met with stunned silence, then a few nervous nods. Some executives, those whose culpability wasn't as deep as thorns, began to shift uncomfortably, a glimmer of fear, and perhaps even a flicker of grudging admiration in their eyes. The next few hours were a whirlwind. Other executives who had perpetuated the toxic culture, whose names Athena had meticulously recorded in her little notebook, were quietly dismissed. The company was being purged, its poisoned core systematically removed. As Athena finally walked through the now quiet halls later that day, the office felt different. Quieter. Almost peaceful. The old suffocating energy was gone, and in its place, a sense of hopeful anticipation began to stir. The reckoning was over. The rebuilding was about to begin. In the weeks that followed, the very air within Technova Solutions seemed to shift. The stifling weight of fear and cynicism began to lift, replaced by a cautious, then palpable energy. The toxic culture that had festered for so long was systematically dismantled piece by painful piece. Executives who clung to the old ways, who couldn't shed their ingrained arrogance, found themselves politely but firmly shown the door. Athena had no patience for those who couldn't adapt, for those who couldn't grasp that true strength came from collaboration, not control. Athena now sat in the spacious corner office, the vast city skyline stretching out before her like a promise. On her polished mahogany desk, a stack of files rose, each one representing not just a new project or a quarterly report, but a fresh opportunity, a new direction for the company. She had always believed that leadership wasn't about titles or power. It was about the profound impact you had on the people around you, about fostering an environment where every single voice felt valued. And now she had the chance to lead by example, to prove that empathy and profit were not mutually exclusive. As she picked up the first file, ready to dive into the work ahead, a soft, hesitant knock sounded at her door. "Come in!" Athena called, her voice warm and inviting. It was one of the janitors, a young woman named Anya, no older than her mid-20s, who had been hired just a few days prior. Anya stood nervously in the doorway, her eyes wide, clearly unsure if she should be bothering the CEO. But Athena, recognizing that same hesitant vulnerability she herself had often felt, simply smiled and waved her in. "Don't worry," Athena said, her voice gentle. "What can I do for you, Anya?" The young woman hesitated for a moment, twisting her hands before finding her voice. I just wanted to say thank you, Ms. Vance, for everything you've done. I've never worked at a place where people like me were treated with respect. Not just the cleaning staff, but everyone. It feels different now, like we actually matter." Athena's heart swelled with a quiet pride, a profound sense of satisfaction that went far deeper than any financial gain. She leaned forward, her gaze kind and direct. "You're very welcome, Anya," she said, her voice soft but firm. "And remember this truly, everyone here deserves respect, no matter what their job is. Every single person contributes, and every single person is valuable. That's the foundation we're building here." Anya nodded, a genuine smile, finally breaking through her nervousness, and quietly left the office. Athena leaned back in her chair, a deep, quiet sense of contentment settling over her. The work was just beginning. There would be challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But she knew with unwavering certainty that together with a renewed spirit and a shared purpose, they would build something truly great at Technova Solutions. And this time, no one would be left behind. This time, every single person from the boardroom to the break room would be seen, heard, and valued. The storm had come, and Athena had not just emerged victorious. She had laid the groundwork for a lasting legacy of empathy, proving that the most powerful leaders are often the ones who understand what it means to be invisible. And so the storm had come, bringing with it not just destruction, but cleansing. Athena Vance. The woman they laughed at, the woman they tried to fire, had not only saved Technova Solutions from financial ruin, but had purged its toxic core, replacing contempt with respect and indifference with empathy. She proved that true power isn't measured by a title on a door, but by the integrity in your heart, and the impact you have on the lives around you. It's the story of rising above the slights, the microaggressions, the unspoken assumptions. It's for the Black women and men who have built empires from the ground up, only to have their contributions minimized. Never let anyone define your worth based on their fleeting judgment, because sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one they never see coming. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video. Let's keep these powerful stories of strength and justice alive. And tell us in the comments, what would you do if you were in Athena's shoes? Until next time, stay strong, stay visible.